So you know how every culture on Earth has demons in their mythology? Doesn't matter where you go. Japan's got yokai, Christians have their fallen angels, ancient Greeks had daimones. Everywhere you look, there's these dark spirits lurking in the shadows of human imagination. But here's something I bet you've never thought about. Where did it all begin? What was the very first demon that someone actually took the time to write down? The answer takes us back over 5,000 years to the dusty river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia in what's now Iraq. And honestly, when you dig into this, it gets way darker and more fascinating than you'd expect. Let me set the scene for you. Around 3500 BC, the Sumerians were living in these city states between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The land there was brutal, scorching hot in summer, floods in spring that could wipe out everything you owned. Life was hard and short, and death felt like it was always standing just outside your door. But the Sumerians, they were doing something no humans had ever done before. They were inventing writing. Now, when I say writing, I don't mean they sat down and immediately started composing epic poems. At first, it was incredibly practical. They'd take these reeds from the riverbanks, cut them at an angle, and press them into soft clay tablets. The marks they made looked like little wedges. That's why we call it cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge. They started using this to track stuff, boring accounting records mostly. Things like how many sheep someone owned or how much grain was stored in the temple. You know, the kind of records that keep a civilization from falling apart. But here's where it gets interesting. Once you have a way to preserve information permanently, once you can press symbols into clay and bake it hard so it lasts forever, well, you're not just going to use it for inventory lists. Pretty soon, people started writing down the stories they'd been telling around fires for generations. The myths, the legends, the things that explained how the world worked and what happened when you died. And that's when we get our first demons. The earliest ones we have actual written records of are called the Galu. Sometimes you'll see it as Gala with an A or Galu with two L's. Linguists aren't totally sure about the exact pronunciation because, well, Sumerian's been a dead language for thousands of years, but we have their name, we have their stories, and they appear in texts that date back to around 2100 BC, though the oral traditions behind these stories probably go back centuries or even millennia earlier. Now, these weren't your modern idea of demons. Forget the horns and pitchforks, forget the red skin and sulfur smell. The Gallu were something way more primal and terrifying. They lived in Kur. That's what the Sumerians called the underworld. Sometimes they called it Irkala or Kigul or Arali, depending on the region and time period. All these names basically mean the same thing, the land of the dead. And it wasn't the place you wanted to go. Picture a massive cavern deep beneath the earth, darker than any night you've ever experienced. The Sumerians imagined it as this huge underground city with 7 massive walls and 7 enormous gates. Each gate was guarded. You couldn't just stroll in or out. And inside those walls, in the absolute depths of this place, was a palace, the palace of Ereshkigal, the Queen of the Dead. Ereshkigal's name literally means Queen of the Great Earth, or Lady of the Great Below, and from what we can tell from the texts, she didn't choose to rule the underworld. According to some myths, she was dragged there against her will and forced to become its queen. So she's ruling this nightmare realm, and she's not exactly happy about it. Makes sense that her enforcers would be absolutely brutal. The Galus served her. They were her police force, her bounty hunters, her executioners. Their job was simple and horrifying. When someone's time was up, when death came calling, the Galu would go get them. And they were described in these texts in ways that still give me chills. They didn't eat, they didn't drink, they didn't sleep, they didn't accept bribes or offerings like other spirits might. You couldn't negotiate with them. The texts say they were relentless. Once they had their target, that was it. They'd drag your soul kicking and screaming down through those 7 gates into the depths of Kor, and there was absolutely nothing you could do about it. Think about that for a second. The very first demons humanity ever wrote about weren't tempters trying to corrupt you. They weren't tricksters making deals. They were basically death's secret police. Supernatural bounty hunters with a 100% success rate. And the Sumerians, man, they were absolutely terrified of these things. We have ritual texts, actual prayers and incantations, where people are desperately trying to protect themselves from Galu attacks. They'd make offerings to other gods, begging for protection. They'd perform elaborate rituals, hoping maybe, just maybe, they could keep the Galu away. Because once these demons decided you were the one, your time was done. The Galu star, in what might be the oldest epic poem in human history. It's called The Descent of Inanna, and when you read it, you realize humans have been writing psychological horror for a very, very long time. Inanna was one of the biggest deals in the Sumerian pantheon. Goddess of love, goddess of war, goddess of sex and violence and everything in between. She was powerful. She was feared. She had the kind of divine authority that made other gods nervous. And one day, she decided to visit her sister Ereshkigal in the underworld. Now, the texts don't give us a totally clear reason why. Some versions say she wanted to attend a funeral. Others hint that maybe she wanted to expand her power, to rule both the world above and the world below, sibling rivalry on a cosmic scale. Whatever her reasons, before she left, Inanna did something smart. She told her loyal servant, Ninshubur, "If I'm not back in 3 days, go get help, raise the alarm, get the gods involved." Then she descended. The journey down was like a reverse striptease of power. Inanna reached the first gate of the underworld, and the gatekeeper, a guy named Neti, stopped her. "You want to enter the realm of the dead?" He said. "Fine, but first you have to remove your crown." So she did. She gave up her crown, the symbol of her divine authority. At the second gate, they took her jewelry, the beads that gave her power. At the third gate, her breastplate. At the fourth, more of her divine regalia. Gate after gate, piece by piece, they stripped away everything that made her a goddess. By the seventh gate, she walked through completely naked, powerless, just another soul entering the land of death. And there, in the throne room of the underworld, sat Ereshkigal. The reunion between the sisters was not warm. Ereshkigal looked at Inanna, and she was furious. Some interpretations suggest Ereshkigal resented Inanna for getting to live in the sunlight, for being loved and worshipped, while she was stuck ruling the dead. Whatever the reason, Ereshkigal wasn't having it. She summoned the judges of the underworld, these ancient deities called the Anunnaki. They surrounded Inanna. They passed judgment on her. And then Ereshkigal did something shocking. She just killed her. The goddess of love and war, one of the most powerful beings in existence, and Ereshkigal killed her with a look. They hung Inanna's corpse on a hook on the wall like a piece of meat and left it there to rot. 3 days passed. Up on Earth, Ninshubur realized something had gone very wrong. She went to the gods for help, begging them to rescue Inanna. Most of them refused. "The underworld," they said, "that's not our jurisdiction. That's Ereshkigal's domain. We don't mess with death." But Enki, the god of wisdom and water, he was craftier. He took the dirt from under his own fingernails and shaped 2 tiny beings. Not gods, not quite demons, just these little creatures made from clay. He gave them the food and water of life and sent them down to the underworld. These little beings managed to sneak into the throne room. They found Inanna's corpse still hanging there. They sprinkled her with the food and water of life, and boom, she revived. Inanna gasped back into existence and immediately started heading for the exit. But Here's the cosmic rule that makes this whole story terrifying. In the Mesopotamian underworld, nobody leaves without a replacement. It's like an exchange program with death itself. If Inanna wanted to return to the land of the living, someone else had to take her place. This is where the Galyu come in. When Inanna rose from the dead and started her journey back up through those 7 gates, 7 Galu demons came with her, and the way the text describes them, it's genuinely creepy. It says they clung to her. They were like reeds, as tall as low fences. One of them carried a staff, even though he wasn't a minister or official. Another carried a mace. They didn't walk beside her. They swarmed around her. Their mission was clear: make sure Inanna finds someone to take her place, make sure the cosmic balance is maintained. Death doesn't give freebies. So, Inanna and this terrifying entourage of demons traveled to various cities. First, they encountered Ninshubur, her loyal servant. The Galu immediately moved to grab her, but Inanna stopped them. No, she said. Ninshubur mourned for me. She wore mourning clothes. She tore her hair out. She did everything right, not her. They moved on. They found Inanna's sons. Same thing. The boys were dressed in mourning garments, wailing and grieving. The Galu reached for them, but again, Inanna said no. They mourned. They showed proper respect. Leave them alone. Then they arrived at the city of Uruk, and there on his throne sat Dumuzi, Inanna's husband. He was dressed in beautiful clothes, fine robes. He looked comfortable, relaxed, completely unbothered. The throne room was decorated. There was music. Dumuzi clearly hadn't mourned at all. In fact, it kind of looked like he'd been enjoying his wife being gone. Maybe he figured, with the Queen of Heaven and War dead, he'd get to be in charge for a change. Inanna took one look at him, and her expression changed. The texts describe her fixing him with the eye of death. She pointed at Dumuzi and spoke 3 words to the Galu: take him. What happens next is honestly one of the most visceral demon attack scenes in any ancient literature. The Galu swarmed Dumuzi. They grabbed him with these supernatural clutches that no human strength could break. He panicked. He started running, begging the sun god Utu for help. Utu took pity on him and transformed him into a snake so he could escape. But it didn't matter. The Galu hunted him down anyway. They tracked him through marshes, through fields, through every hiding place he could find. And eventually, they caught him. They dragged him, screaming and pleading, back down through those 7 gates into the depths of Kur. There's something so raw about that story. The betrayal, the fury, the absolute impossibility of escape once the Galu had marked you. Dumuzi tried everything. He called on gods. He changed form. He ran. And none of it worked. The demons always caught up. What makes the Galu so fascinating, and honestly so terrifying, is how alien they are compared to later demons. When you look at demons in other mythologies, they usually have some kind of personality. Greek demons might be jealous or spiteful. Christian demons are rebels, fallen angels with their own agendas. Even trickster spirits have motivations you can kind of understand. The Galyu don't. They are more like forces of nature. They are described in the texts almost like a natural disaster in demon form. A flood doesn't care who you are. An earthquake doesn't negotiate. The Galu were the same way. They just fulfilled their function. And that function was terrifying because of what the Sumerians believed about death. See, the Mesopotamian afterlife wasn't divided into heaven and hell. There was no sorting process where good people go to paradise and bad people go to punishment. Everyone went to the same place. Kings and slaves, priests and thieves, heroes and cowards all ended up in Kur. It was a totally democratic system in the worst possible way. The underworld was described as this place where you ate dust and your only drink was whatever your descendants poured onto your grave from the surface. Actual clay tablets describe it as the land of no return, the house of dust, the place where they sit in darkness. The dead were said to be dressed in feathers like birds, or sometimes they were naked. They lived in a dim, shadowy version of life above. Everything you experienced up there, you'd experience down there, but muted, dulled, drained of all color and vitality. And this is where the Sumerians' view gets really dark. Your quality of afterlife didn't depend on how you lived, it depended on how you were buried. If your family gave you a proper burial with all the right rituals, you'd be okay, relatively speaking. Still miserable, still eating dust, but okay. If you got a cheap burial, or no burial at all, if you died in a fire and your body burned, if you died alone in the desert with nobody to perform the rites, then you'd have no existence in the afterworld at all. You'd just cease to be, or worse, you'd become one of those wandering ghosts that haunt the living because you have nobody to pour libations for you. The Sumerians were obsessed with burial rites because of this. Having children was incredibly important because you needed descendants to keep performing rituals at your grave, to keep pouring water for you to drink, to remember your name. Without that, you'd suffer eternally. So imagine you're a Sumerian. You know that when you die, you're going to this bleak cavern under the earth. You know you're going to spend eternity eating dust. And you know that when your time comes, the Galu will come for you. These relentless, unstoppable demons that don't eat, don't sleep, don't negotiate, they'll drag you down through those 7 gates, whether you're ready or not. No wonder they were terrified. The ancient Mesopotamians made protective amulets against the Galu. We found these, actual physical objects people wore to try to keep the demons away. They'd recite prayers and incantations. They'd make offerings to other gods, hoping for protection. Some texts describe people performing elaborate rituals, drawing magic circles, doing anything they could think of to ward off these creatures. But the texts are pretty clear. Once the Galu decided you were the one, once Death said it was your time, there wasn't really anything you could do. All your prayers might buy you a little time, might delay them, but eventually they'd come, and when they did, you were going to cure whether you liked it or not. So why does it matter that these are the first demons in recorded history? Why should we care about some clay tablets from 5,000 years ago? Because it tells us something profound about how humans have always thought about death and the unknown. When the Sumerians were building the first cities, creating the first written laws, inventing mathematics and astronomy, they were also trying to make sense of the one thing nobody can escape: mortality. Why do people die? Where do they go? What happens after? The Galu were their answer. Death needs enforcers. The boundary between life and death needs guards. And those guards are absolutely, utterly merciless, because death itself is merciless. It doesn't care if you're a king or a beggar. It doesn't care if you have unfinished business. When your time comes, it comes, and something has to make sure that boundary is enforced. It's beautiful in a dark way. These ancient people, sitting by lamplight in their mud brick houses, scratching symbols into wet clay, trying to explain the inexplicable. And the image they came up with, these relentless underworld enforcers, was so powerful that it echoed through every culture that came after. You see the same pattern repeat everywhere once you start looking. The ancient Egyptians had their underworld guards and judgment scenes. Greek mythology has Charon the ferryman and the three-headed dog Cerberus guarding the gates of Hades. Norse mythology has spirits that gather souls for hell. Japanese folklore has demons that drag sinners to different levels of Buddhist hell. Every culture needs something to explain that final journey. Every culture needs enforcers of death, but the Galu were first, at least first that we know of. First that someone thought was important enough to preserve in writing. And here's something else. The descent of Inanna isn't just about demons. It's about power and loss. And what happens when even gods have to face death? Inanna was the queen of heaven. She had everything: divine authority, worshippers across dozens of cities, powers that could shake the earth. But in the underworld, all that meant absolutely nothing. She was stripped bare, literally and figuratively. Every gate took something from her until she stood there with nothing, and then she died just like any mortal would. The Galu represent that truth. They don't care who you are. They don't care about your accomplishments or your status. When your time comes, you're just another soul being dragged to judgment, or in the Sumerian case, not even judgment. Just oblivion and dust. That's a heavy concept to wrestle with, and it's been with humanity since we first learned how to write. Now, you might be wondering how we even know all this. How do we know these are really the first demons in writing? How can we be sure this isn't just made up or exaggerated? Well, we have the tablets, actual physical clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia with these stories carved into them. They're sitting in museums right now. The British Museum has some. The University of Pennsylvania Museum has others. These aren't legends or hearsay. These are primary sources, the real deal. The oldest versions of the descent of Inanna that we have date back to around 1900 BC. That's almost 4,000 years ago. But scholars think the oral traditions behind the story go back way, way further. Maybe to 3500 BC or even earlier, when the Sumerians first started developing their religious concepts. There are older religious artifacts, sure. There's this wooden statue called the Shigir idol from Russia that's like 11,600 years old. It's got these carved faces on it, and some researchers think they might represent evil spirits or demons. But here's the problem: we can't read what it means. There's no writing with it. No context. We're just guessing based on the imagery. The Galu are different. We have their story, we know their names, we have descriptions of what they looked like and how they behaved, and what people thought about them. We have prayers people recited to keep them away. We have amulets people wore for protection. That's the power of writing. It locks these ideas in place forever. And once writing spread, once literacy became more common across Mesopotamia, these concepts spread too. The Akkadians adopted the Sumerian myths, then the Babylonians, then the Assyrians. The idea of underworld demons became so ingrained in Mesopotamian culture that it influenced every civilization that came after. Even the Hebrew Bible shows influence from these ancient Mesopotamian concepts. Sheol, the Hebrew underworld, is described in ways that sound a lot like Kur, a dark, shadowy place beneath the earth where everyone goes when they die. The idea that you need proper burial rites to rest peacefully. Even some of the demon names in Jewish demonology may have roots that trace back to these ancient Mesopotamian spirits. The Sumerians basically created the template. They said, death is a place. It's ruled by gods or goddesses. It's guarded. It has enforcers. And those enforcers are terrifying because they have to be. Death has to be scary enough that people respect it, but inevitable enough that everyone knows they can't escape it. Think about what that means. When a Sumerian child asked their parents what happens when we die, the answer involved the Galu. When they performed funerals, they were thinking about these demons. When they buried their loved ones with offerings and performed the proper rituals, they were trying to ensure those souls wouldn't be dragged away to an even worse fate. The Galu were part of daily life in a way we can barely imagine. Death wasn't some abstract concept. It had a face. Actually, it had 7 faces. 7 demons that would come for you when your time was up. So there you have it. The first demon ever recorded in history wasn't some fallen angel or rebellious spirit with a tragic backstory. It was a group of underworld enforcers called the Galu, who appeared in Sumerian texts over 4,000 years ago. They served Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead, and their job was simple and absolutely terrifying. They came for you when death said it was time, and there was no escape. They didn't tempt. They didn't bargain. They didn't offer you deals or try to corrupt your soul. They just did their job with the relentlessness of a force of nature. And honestly, that might be scarier than any horned devil with a pitchfork could ever be. Because think about it. Later demons in Christian mythology, they want something from you. Your soul, sure, but they have to work for it. They have to tempt you, trick you, get you to make a choice. There's an element of free will involved. You could theoretically say no and walk away. The Galu didn't work that way. They weren't interested in your choices. They were the inevitable conclusion, the thing that happens no matter what you do. You can be the best person in the world or the worst. You can be powerful like Inanna or powerless like a common farmer. When the Galu come for you, they're taking you, and that's that. It's the absolute finality that makes them so frightening. They represent something humans have never really gotten comfortable with. The fact that death is real and it's coming and there's nothing you can do about it. You can prepare for it, you can make peace with it, but you can't stop it. The Sumerians understood this. They lived hard lives in a harsh environment. Disease, warfare, floods, famine. Death was always close. So they created these myths to explain it, to give it a face, and the face they gave it was the Galu. 7 demons who would drag you into darkness when your time came. And you know what's wild? We're still telling these stories. Oh, we've dressed them up differently, we've given them new names, new appearances, new rules, but the core idea is the same. There are beings that enforce the boundary between life and death. There are spirits that come for souls. There are things in the darkness that even gods fear. Every horror movie with demons, every fantasy novel with underworld creatures, every video game where you fight your way through hell, they all owe something to these ancient Sumerian myths, to clay tablets pressed in the heat of Mesopotamian summer 5,000 years ago. The next time you see demons in movies, or read about them in books, or encounter them in games, take a second to remember where it all started. In a city between 2 rivers, in the world's first civilization, a scribe sat down with a reed and some wet clay and wrote about the beings that drag souls into darkness. That's where the nightmare began. In the first written words about the supernatural, in the first attempt to capture the uncapturable, to explain death itself. And we've been telling the story ever since, passing it down through millennia, translating it into 1,000 languages, adapting it for every new medium. The Gallu are still with us. Maybe not by that name, maybe not with the exact same characteristics, but the idea of them, the concept they represent, that's immortal. Which is ironic when you think about it. These demons of death, these enforcers of mortality, they themselves are immortal in the collective memory of humanity. The Sumerians are long gone. Their cities are ruins covered by desert sand. Their language hasn't been spoken in thousands of years. But the Galu survive. In every demon that comes to drag a soul away, in every spirit that enforces the rules of death, in every story about the inevitable end that awaits us all. That's the power of the written word. That's what happens when you take an idea and press it into clay and bake it hard enough to last 5,000 years. The story survives. The nightmare continues. And somewhere in a museum, those clay tablets are still there, still telling the tale of the first demons ever recorded in human history. Kind of makes you think, doesn't it? What stories are we writing today that will still terrify people 5,000 years from now? What concepts are we creating that will survive long after our civilization is dust? What are we adding to that long, unbroken chain of human imagination that stretches all the way back to ancient Sumer? The Galu were the beginning, but they're not the end. The conversation about death, about demons, about what waits for us in the darkness, that conversation started in 3500 BC and it's still going. And it probably always will be, as long as humans fear death and try to understand it. That's the real legacy of the first demons. Not just that they existed, but that we're still talking about them, still telling their story, still passing it on to the next generation. The Galu may have been enforcers of death, but the idea of them, that's proven to be pretty much immortal.